Hello everyone, Alex here from warnoffkeys.com, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can create a thanks command which is going to allow users to thank other users for helping them. This is a feature that the Warn Off Keys Discord has, and this will also be paired with the next video where I'm going to show you how you can create your own leaderboard using this same thanks command. So a demo of this, if we go into the Warn Off Keys Discord, we can go to thanks leaderboard and we see the top 10 thanks people right here. And this updates every minute. So we'll be creating a leaderboard in the next video. And in this video, we are going to be creating a thank command that allows users to thank each other for helping them. Now the same concepts can apply to other systems and other leaderboards if you want to create those. So just make sure you follow this tutorial and you understand the concepts to be able to apply these concepts to other ideas that you might have. And real quick, before we start, if you do need help with anything, then feel free to ask in the Warn Off Keys Discord server. We just passed 1,500 members, and as you can see, we have a bunch of people joining every day. So once you have joined, you can scroll down and ask your JavaScript questions within the JavaScript channel, and I'm sure someone will be able to help you out there. So with that said, let's get started. I'm going to be using the Commando framework, and a link on how to use the Commando framework can be found in the video description. I'm going to go inside of my commands folder, and I'm going to make a new folder here called thanks. That's because we're going to have multiple commands that are related to the thanks functionality. So I'm going to store them inside of this folder. Now because we're using Commando, we have to actually register this folder as a valid place for commands to exist. So I can go inside of my index file, scrolling down. Here we see all these groups, and I'm wanting to add in a new array. This will be called thanks because that's the name of our folder. And then the second element here is going to be called commands to help thank people. We can then save this and go ahead and close this file. Now within the thanks folder, I'm going to make a new file called thanks.js, and this is where our thanks command is going to exist. In order to create a Commando command, we have to first import Commando, so const commando equals require discord.js-commando. We then have to export a class, which is going to extend commando.command, so we're going to inherit all the functionality that Commando gives us in order to create a command. So let's export a class with module.exports equals class. We'll call this thanks command. And this class is going to extend or inherit the functionality of commando.command. We can do that with extends commando.command. Now within this class, we have all the functionality Commando gives us. We want to go ahead and set up our command, so we need a constructor for that. A constructor is a method that is going to be ran whenever a new instance of a class is created. And we're going to have one parameter given to us, which is an instance of our client. Now at this stage, we have to call the constructor for the command class, which we're extending. And in order to do that, we have to call the super method. We have to pass in two arguments here. The first one is the client. The second one is going to be an object, which is going to contain some information about our command. For example, name. I'm going to name this THX as a shorter way of saying thanks. The reason for this is I'm going to be testing this within the Warn Off Keys Discord server, and the official Warn Off Keys Discord bot does have a command that's spelled thanks normally. And so I'm going to be using THX as a shorter way. You can use the normal thanks spelling though. I'm then going to specify a group, which will be thanks because that's the folder we're inside of. We could then specify a member name, which will also be THX. I could then add in a description, which will be anything you want. For example, thanks a user for helping you. And then we need an asynchronous run function. So run equals asynchronous. This is going to be a function with one parameter here, which is a message. And now that we have access to this message, we can get a user that we are tagging. And if we aren't tagging anyone, we want to complain to the user saying, please specify someone to thank. So I can say const target equals message.mentions, which is going to give me access to all of the mentioned channels and users. We can access the user specifically with the user's property, and that's going to give us a collection. So we can use the first method, which is going to return the first item within that collection. Now, if no one was mentioned, this is going to be a null value, and so we can use an if statement to see if target is actually a valid variable. So if not target, if this condition is true, that means that this if statement will be ran whenever someone was not mentioned. So if I just say exclamation point thanks and then test, which obviously isn't mentioning someone, then this if statement will be ran. So we want to complain to the user at this stage. Message.reply. Please specify someone to thank, and then we can return. So now we know that we've actually mentioned someone, and there's a few more steps we want to take here. The first is to make sure that the command sender hasn't thanked someone within the last 24 hours. Now, if they haven't thanked someone, then we want to update the last time that they've thanked someone to the current timestamp of them running the command. And then also we want to increase the amount of thanks that the target user has received. So this means that we need access to a database. And so I'm going to be using MongoDB, and I'm going to make a new schema file. I can call this thanks-schema.js. Within here, I have to first import mongoose. So constant mongoose equals require mongoose. And then we have to create our own thanks schema object. So constant thanks schema equals mongoose.schema with a capital S. Within the object, we have to specify some information. There's going to be multiple things in here that are going to be required strings. And so if you've been following the series, you know that I like to create one object, which is going to represent a required string, so I can then reuse that object and not have to type things out multiple times. So for example, const rec string for required string. The type is going to be string, and required is going to be true. Now at this stage within our schema, we can pass in a user ID, which will be a required string. This will obviously be the ID of the user who was thanked. We can also pass in a guild ID, which will be another required string. This is very useful for the leaderboard functionality, which I'll make in the next video. We then want received, which will be a type of number, and then default is 0. This is going to be how many thanks this user has actually received. And then the last thing we want is going to be last gave, which is going to be a date. This is going to be the last time this person actually ran the command. Now at this stage, we can export this as a mongoose model. So module.exports equals mongoose.model. We can pass in the name of our collection. I already have thanks as a collection name. Feel free to use that. But again, I already have this functionality in the official Worn Off Keys Discord bot. So I'm going to name this thanks tutorial. I'm then going to pass in the schema name, which is thanks schema. And one thing to keep in mind is that mongoose is going to actually add in an S to the end of this because this isn't plural. However, I don't want that, so I can specify the actual name of the collection to use here. So thanks-tutorial, and it will forcefully use this exact name and not add in an S by default, which is what it would do if I didn't have this third argument. That's just a quick side note, just in case you didn't know about that. But if you were just saying thanks, like I suggest, then this isn't something to worry about. So I can go ahead and save this. I can go inside of my thanks command and want to import this file. So const thanks schema equals require. We need to find our schemas folder and then access the thanks file right here. However, I have something installed called module aliases, which I will link to in the video description. Essentially allows me to specify a name of a folder, and I don't have to use relative paths with a .. I do have a video on how to do this within my channel. However, if you don't want to do this, then you can feel free to just use the normal relative paths. It'll work just the same way. Now I want to create a constant called now, which is going to be the current timestamp. So I'm going to set this equal to new date. And then above this, I also want to get access to the guild from the message, so we can destructure the guild property from the message object. And with this, we now have access to the guild ID, which is going to be important because each individual thank is going to be different depending on each individual guild. The main reason for that is it's going to be multi-server supported, and also it's going to be very useful for each individual server's leaderboard. Now there's a couple more pieces of information we want to make easily available. The first one is going to be the target ID. So I can say const target ID equals target.id. And then we also want access to the author ID that is going to be the author of the message. So const author ID equals message.author.id. Now that we have these 4 pieces of useful information, we want to go ahead and do some checks to make sure that this is going to be a valid thank. The easiest thing to start with is going to be if you are trying to thank yourself, because it doesn't require any database calls, and so therefore we're just comparing 2 strings, and that's going to be much faster than connecting to the database, so we want to do that first. So if target ID is exactly equal to author ID, we then want to complain to the user, message.reply, you cannot thank yourself, and then we can return. Now after this, we want to make sure that the person who is running the command has not ran this command within the last 24 hours. That means we have to fetch the information for this user and for this guild. So I can say const author data equals await. Because we're using await, make sure this is an asynchronous function, as we see right here on line 14. We can say thanks schema dot find one. We can then pass in a certain query here. So we're going to say user ID will be author ID, and that the guild ID is going to be guild.id. And actually, to follow the same exact format, I'm going to create a constant called guild ID instead of equal to guild.id. And so that way we can specify this right here. And I would rename author ID to user ID, but that might get confused between the target and the author because these are very clearly different. But if I were to specify user ID, it's not very clear which one I mean. However, user ID is going to be the ID within the actual schema. So we'll keep that there. That's fine to have because that might represent the actual target or the author. And you'll see what I mean by that here in a few moments. Now at this stage, author ID is either going to be an object that represents the blueprint that our schema defines, or it's going to be null. So we want to see if this object exists, and then we want to compare the last gave date to the current date, which is called now, which we define on 25. So I can say if author data. That way we'll make sure that this is a non-null value. We also want to make sure that last gave is a property of this, so and author data.last gave. Again, this is a property that is going to be attached to this potentially because of this schema right here. So we have a now date. I want to create a then date. So const then equals new date. We can pass in author data.last gave. And now we're wanting to compare the difference in milliseconds between these two dates. So const diff equals now.getTime, which will give us a millisecond timestamp minus then.getTime. So this is going to be the difference in milliseconds, but now we want the difference in hours. So const diff hours equals math.round. We can then pass in difference divided by some calculation within parentheses here, and this is going to represent how many milliseconds there are within 1 hour. There's 1000 milliseconds in a second. We can now times that by 60, which means we're talking about minutes. We can then times that by 60 again, which means we're talking about hours. Now I can say if diff hours is less than or equal to 24, we then want to complain to the user saying that they've already thanked someone within the last 24 hours. Now that we're going to say 24 within this message, and we say 24 right here, I'm going to create a constant here called hours. So that's equal to 24. So we can say less than or equal to 24 by specifying the variable name. And then we can reply to the user with a template literal saying, you have already thanked someone within the last pass in hours. Now we can return. This is useful because if we ever want to change this to, let's say 12, we can just change it in this one constant here, and it'll change for both the message and the actual comparison. I'm going to change it back to 24. And now after this entire if statement, at this stage, if we're still running the code, we know that this person has not thanked someone within the last 24 hours. So we now want to update the last gave property for the command sender. So I'm going to add in a comment just to make sure it's very clear what we're doing. So update the last gave property for the command sender. So we're going to use the find one and update method for this. So await thank schema.find one and update. This is something I've covered a lot within my channel, but a brief introduction would be this is going to either insert some document or update a document depending on if that document already exists. This is going to take in 3 objects. The first object is going to be the actual filter or condition to try and find this user. And this is going to be very similar to this right here. So we're going to pass in a user ID, which is the author ID, and then the guild ID. So user ID is author ID, and then we can pass in the guild ID. So this is telling Mongo that we want to try and find a document that matches this criteria. If it does exist, we then want to update it with whatever is inside of the second object. However, if it doesn't exist, we want to insert it with whatever is inside the second object. So with that said, because we do have to potentially insert this data, we want to go ahead and copy and paste this in here, so we have access to it within the actual document. We then want to provide last gave, which is going to be now, which is the current timestamp, as we defined right up here on line 25. And so if this already exists, we're then going to just update last gave, but if this doesn't exist, we're going to insert this entire thing here. Now, in order to make sure that that works how we want it, we can say upsert is true, which is a combination of update and insert, which is the concept I was just explaining. Now after this, we want to increase how many thanks the target user has had. So we can say increase how many thanks the target user has had. So I can say await thank schema.find one and update. Again, 3 objects here. The first one will be a filter. So the user ID is now going to be target ID. So again, target ID is whoever was actually mentioned, when author ID is going to be who ran the command. We can then specify guild ID. And same concept, I'm going to copy this inside of the second object. I could then say $inc, which is going to increase whatever we specify within this object. For example, received will be increased by 1. And then within this object, we can say upsert is true. But now at this stage, I want to receive what the new value is for how many thanks this user has received. Find1 and update will actually return this information, so I can say const results equals this. However, this is going to return the data before our actual increase right here. We can change this by passing in new equals true, which would then mean it's going to return the data that is new, so after we've increased by 1. At this stage, we can create a constant called amount, so that's equal to result.received. And then we can reply to the user who actually thanked the person, saying that they've thanked that user and they now have this many thanks. So message.reply with a template literal. We can then say you have thanked, and we want to tag the target user. So the syntax for that within Discord.js is less than, @ greater than, and then in between the @ and the greater than, we have to specify the ID. So target ID. So you have thanked this user. They now have, want to insert an amount, which is the constant we just created. Thanks. So we can go ahead and save this, and let's go ahead and try it. Keep in mind that my command is thx, but yours might be actual thanks. So I can go inside of Discord. I'm within my tutorial channel. I can go to my console and I can run my bot with node index.js. I can then !thanks at Alexander Flores. And it's going to say you cannot thank yourself. Ignore the one-off keys thing here. It's basically just going to text if someone says thanks and try and tell them to use the thank command. Now I can specify thanks test. Please specify someone to thank. So thanks. Please specify someone to thank. So that's working. Now what happens if I actually thank the one-off keys bot? So thanks at one-off keys. It'll then say you thanked one-off keys. They now have 1 thanks. So I can go ahead and try thanking the tutorial bot. So thanks at tutorial. And it's going to say you've already thanked someone within the last 24 hours. So I can go ahead and stop my bot and I can go into Mongo. I can scroll up and I can click on refresh. Scrolling down, we're going to see thanks tutorial. And now we see this right here. The guild ID will be the same. The user ID is going to be different because this is the last gave property, which means that this is whoever ran the command. This is my user ID. However, this right here is the one-off keys bot, who is the person that I thanked. And here we see received. So I can actually manually update this and change this to 2 days ago. So it's definitely more than 24 hours. I can then click on update and then I can run my bot again and I can try thanking the tutorial bot again. So thanks at tutorial. It now says you have thanked tutorial. They now have 1 thanks. I can then click on find. And now I see another document here. One of these is the one-off keys bot. The other one is going to be the tutorial bot because both have received 1 thank. And also the last gave, if you notice, this is now updated to the current timestamp. So as you probably expect, I cannot thank anyone else. So if I try thanking tutorial again, it's going to say I've already thanked someone within the last 24 hours. So this is how you're going to create a thanks command. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to create a leaderboard similar to this one here, using the same exact command and the same exact concept. Thanks for watching this Discord.js tutorial. If you want to learn more about Discord.js, consider clicking on the playlist you see on your screen now. If you need help, feel free to leave a comment or ask in the Worn Off Keys Discord, which can be found in the video description.